Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, let's jump right into things because we are tackling a topic today that keeps so many people up at night. We're looking at family law in Ontario, specifically the concept we all used to call child custody. Now, if you or someone you know is navigating a separation in 2026, you probably have a lot of preconceived notions. You're picturing courtroom battles, winners, losers, and just endless, draining conflict. But I am here to tell you, with genuine excitement, honestly, that the reality of Ontario family law today is vastly different. It is actually a lot more relieving than you might think. We're going to take a really structured, clear look at how these decisions are actually made today, stripping away all those old myths and just focusing on the facts. But just a quick, super important note before we get into the weeds of our topic. This explainer is for general informational purposes. Olanur AI is a lawyer matching platform. It does not provide legal guides or direct legal services. When you find yourself actually needing personalized legal advice for your specific situation, I highly invite you to visit olanur.com. Over there, you can instantly find a pre-qualified, vetted lawyer in literally minutes. You can just browse their services, select the specific case category you need help with, and get connected. It is absolutely the best way to take the general information we're about to discuss and figure out how it applies to your unique family.
All right, so let's get into it. What actually happens when a court completely erases the word custody? Because believe it or not, if you walk into an Ontario court today asking for custody, you are using a word the law quietly retired years ago. That's right, since March 2021, Ontario courts no longer decide custody or access at all. Those terms completely erased from new legal proceedings. Now, if you happen to have an old order with those words, don't panic, it's still perfectly valid. You don't have to rush back to court just to change a label. But for anyone navigating the system right now, we basically have to completely reboot our vocabulary.
The reason for this massive shift really comes down to psychology. You see, the old law used custody and access, which implicitly framed parenting as a prize to be won. One parent won the child, and the other parent, well, they were essentially just a visitor who got access. It was inherently combative. The new law replaces those outdated ideas with a much, much more collaborative framework. Today, we look at two entirely separate concepts: decision-making responsibility and parenting time. This shifts the whole conversation away from winning a child and refocuses it purely on organizing responsibilities and time. So, what used to be one big, messy custody fight is now broken down into two distinct, highly practical legal questions. Let's break down that first big question. What exactly is decision-making responsibility? Well, this is the legal authority to make the major, long-term choices in a child's life. We are talking about the big three here: health, education, and religion, plus significant extracurricular activities. Now, this authority can be held by one parent alone, which they call sole decision-making responsibility, meaning that parent gets the final say. Or it can be shared between both parents as joint decision-making responsibility. And look, joint works wonderfully if you communicate well, but honestly, not so well if you don't. Courts can even divide it up, like one parent might decide on education while the other handles medical care, though I'll admit that's a bit less common.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is to not confuse those big decisions with the everyday routine. And that brings us to the second distinct question: parenting time. This is what replaced the old word access. Parenting time is quite simply the physical schedule. Which nights is the child in which home? How do you split the holidays? Now, here is a fascinating detail that trips so many people up. Whoever has the child in their care during their parenting time gets to make the routine daily decisions. What's for dinner? What time is bedtime? How much screen time is allowed today? The parent on duty makes those calls without needing to consult the other parent at all. So, practically speaking, you could have joint decision-making for the big stuff, like schooling, while handling the daily grind entirely separately.
So how do these living arrangements actually play out in the real world? Well, there's a whole spectrum of options. Primarily one home means exactly what it sounds like. The child lives mostly with one parent. This is currently the most common pattern we see in Canada. Then we have shared parenting time, where the child spends roughly equal time in each home, and we'll look closer at that trend in just a second. Finally, there's a split arrangement. This is where siblings are actually divided between parents. It's pretty uncommon, though. Courts are highly cautious about separating siblings. The absolute most important takeaway here is that there is no default legal presumption in Ontario. The law doesn't automatically prefer one setup over another from the jump. It only cares about what physical schedule fits that particular child best. And this brings us to a seriously empowering piece of data. We are seeing a massive statistical shift toward roughly equal shared parenting time. Look at this. Back in 2011, only about 9% of separated parents reported an equal arrangement. But by 2017, that number rocketed up to 25%, meaning a solid quarter of arrangements involved shared time of 40 to 60%. And let me tell you, that trend is only climbing as we move through the 2020s. I really want to highlight this to reassure any anxious parents out there watching this. The system is not rigged against you. Courts and modern laws heavily support the principle that a child should have as much time with each parent as is consistent with their well-being. Parents are increasingly coming to the table expecting to share time, focusing on how to make a two-home schedule actually work. So, if you do end up in court, how does a judge actually make a ruling? It all comes down to one ultimate singular legal test that rules all decisions in Ontario: the best interests of the child. That's it. That is the one and only lens through which every single parenting time and decision-making arrangement is viewed. It completely cuts through the noise of what the parents want or what they feel they deserve. The court gives primary consideration to the child's physical, emotional, and psychological safety, security, and well-being. It is not just some vague slogan, it's a strict, binding legal requirement.
Let's unpack exactly what goes into that best interests test, because it definitely debunks some persistent myths. First and foremost, there is absolutely no legal preference for mothers or fathers. None. Zero. If it seems like one parent ends up with more time, it's often because the court is weighing the history of care. They're looking at who was doing the daily caregiving, making lunches, going to doctor's appointments before the separation, all in an effort to maintain stability for the kid. Next, and this is a huge one, the court heavily favors a parent's willingness to support the child's relationship with the other parent. Sabotaging your ex or trying to cut them out is highly, highly penalized. The court also considers the child's own views, but there's no magic age where kid just gets to choose. It depends entirely on their individual age and maturity. Finally, the court deeply analyzes any history of family violence, which carries its own very detailed list of legal factors.
All right, now that we know the rules of the game, how does an agreement actually get made? There is an escalation ladder of conflict and cost. Step 1 is the kitchen table. You and your ex-partner sit down, maybe pull up a free template online, and write a DIY parenting plan. Step 2 is mediation. If the kitchen table is just too tense, you bring in a neutral professional mediator to help you build the plan cooperatively. Fun fact, Ontario even subsidizes family mediation. Step 3 is court. You need to view court as the absolute last, most stressful, and without a doubt, most expensive resort. The vast majority of families settle things out of court through structured agreements in steps 1 or 2. And let's be real, an agreement you build together holds up far better over the years than terms aggressively imposed on you by a judge after a bitter fight.
However, DIY is definitely not for everyone. There are times when skipping the DIY route and hiring a professional is absolutely essential to protect yourself. First, if there are any safety concerns or family violence, full stop, get professional help immediately. Second, if the other parent already has a lawyer, you need one too, just to ensure you're negotiating on an even playing field. Third, if relocation is on the table, in Ontario, moving a child requires formal notice, generally 60 days, and let me tell you, it is highly contested. Fourth, if communication has completely broken down and you can't even agree on the weather, let alone a schedule for your kid. And finally, if you are simply unsure of your legal position before you sign a binding separation agreement, a single professional consultation early on can save you literally years of headaches down the road.
So, are you ready to protect your family's future without a courtroom war? Because as we've seen today, the modern framework in Ontario is completely designed to help you build a peaceful, workable two-home schedule based entirely on what is actually best for your child. The question you have to ask yourself now is, how will you choose to build your next chapter? It really doesn't have to be a battle. When you're ready to take that next step and you want to make sure your parenting plan is rock solid, or you just need to fully understand your rights, please don't try to navigate it in the dark. Head over to Olanur.com today. Describe what you're dealing with just once and let their system match you with a verified Ontario family lawyer who perfectly fits your specific needs. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and here's to moving forward with absolute clarity and peace of mind.